In our discussion of power and politics in organizations this week, we started out talking about how in general in organizations to be considered political is a very negative thing. It means not trustworthy, not a person of your word, and that there's this general sense that the exercise of power is a bad thing, and people who try to engage in it are people who are not, fair dealers in the organization. And we talked about this very unproductive viewpoint that the very nature of management, being involved in gaining access to resources, budget resources, lines, hires, whatever the people are called in your organization, capacity to hire, all involves to some degree trying to exercise influence, trying to get allocations, and equally true that in management role, we're targets for efforts to influence us and resources that we have available to us. People would like us to allocate them, which makes us targets for these influence behavior. So it's not very productive, certainly just to ignore power in politics, and no manager can expect to ignore, and no one who aspires to exercise leadership can forego, exercising influence and attempting to gain influence in their organization. And so the power of politics in organizations is actually something very important to understand. You may certainly make the choice to opt out of it, but as you saw in the Pfeffer video that was available on Canvas this week, to opt out of it is to also open the potential to be a victim of it and to really not be as effective as you would hope to be as a leader in an organization. So, leaders do engage in power and politics, and it's important to understand it. And as I hope came across, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the summary, it's very important to be a person of your word and very upstanding in terms of working with others, because that makes you politically more influential. Right? You don't want to be the bad kind of politician. There definitely is that, but that's this pejorative sense of what power and politics means in organization. So we began with an adoption of the Cantor definition of power in organization, which is the ability to get things done. People who have power have this demonstrated ability to get things done. Power accrues to them because they can get things done. They become, people desire to be part of coalitions. And so, people with power can get things done, and it helps them certainly command more respect, helps them command higher salaries, helps them have certainly more influence in the organization. We said that in some definitions, there's this kind of emphasis of, fighting through opposition. But what I found, and I think what people who have been in organizations find, that really, most often you're using power to overcome indifference, not opposition. Really, our biggest challenge in getting things done is people just being apathetic and not caring. So power and this ability to get things done, to exercise influence, to mobilize action is a very important part of leadership. It's something that distinguishes a leader versus the manager who is simply victim of organizational processes, is unable to, make changes, is unable to, exercise influence to get the organization to make good decisions. And so, effective leaders have this ability to get things done, and very often it's in the face of apathy, not necessarily opposition. There's some important analytic kind of dimensions to think about power. So one of the things we know is that, different departments have different influence in organizations. And we're very used to thinking about, well, this is a marketing dominated organization because they sell consumer products, or this is a finance dominated operation because they sell furniture, which RC Willey is very much a bank that just happens to have furniture. That is the way that they give people loans. But this is the way that, finance can play a very big role in durable goods. So the notion is that, and we see it in everyday practice, is that firms have these things we call strategic contingencies. They're the most important problems. They're the 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 skill sets that are absolutely critical to the firm's financial success. And people who control that tend to be involved in group decision making. They tend to have a great, they get invited onto key committees, so they have access to information, they give information, they're involved in decision making, and power accrues because of that. And so people who can deal with these critical problems, right? They can get things done that are important to the organization, emerge as powerful within the internal system. We also talked about sources of individual power. So we're interested in, independent of what a department's power is, how are certain individuals more influential beyond what one might expect based on their department. And an individual's power in an organization consists of two components. There's first the formal power that's associated with their position in the authority hierarchy. And positions come with resources, access to information, and those two things together put people in a position to be influential in decision making and the implementation of decisions. But it's usually not fully sufficient to explain a person's influence, and we know that people at the same hierarchical level in an organization are more influential. Some are more influential, partly maybe their department's more influential, but then you have people who seem to be highly involved, and they're part of what we call the dominant coalition in the organization, the people who are at the very highest ranks, who have a lot of influence on the major decision-making, investment decisions, acquisition decisions. Um, Strategic decisions would be the things that the dominant coalition controlled. And we have people who are on that dominant coalition who aren't from particularly powerful departments, but they're there because they have this ability to get things done. They're really good at the leadership side of navigating the organization, getting decisions made, getting decisions implemented. And so we also talked about this notion of informal power. And the informal power is people who can, again, accomplish these things. They can get things done that are outside of their formal authority. And a lot of it's because of the influence they have over other people, their demonstrated leadership, their capacity to put together a coalition, to get people to work effectively together, to get things done. So in this political model, there is this assumption that people have departmental interests. We've seen this kind of pop up throughout our discussion of organizational decision making, that within the division of labor are these specific departmental interests that people pursue. And the political model just accepts this as a kind of a course. It assumes that people to some degree behave to enhance their self-interest. And then once you start to understand this, you start to understand, well, my role in leading the organization is actually marshaling those self-interests, keeping them under control, finding common self-interests. And it's why, even if we harken back to our discussion of group decision-making, right, of bringing the group to a common goal, is really about working through these self-interests and getting people to kind of align their efforts. And again, good leaders are able to be really play a critical role in organizational decision making because they're able to handle this kind of political side of getting things done. And again, we emphasize in our discussion here, we're really much more interested in the do, not the decision. From our standpoint, in talking about decision making in organizations, we want to get things done, not just decisions made that go nowhere. And so people who are good at the kind of things that we talked about in class and are good at building trust networks based on reciprocity, pulling coalitions together, are valued members of the leadership team in any organization. We also talked about, and this is a really critical to understanding power and politics in your organization, and ultimately to understanding how you're going to exercise power, is that given the social value for rationality over political decision making, that a great deal of what we see in how decisions are made has this veneer of rationality, but as you participate, you start to understand that there are a variety of ways that people can control processes, and we call this unobtrusive control, right? You can't see it, so it's not readily visible. It's in the use of legitimate processes, but they're exercising control points that are not highly visible. And that's how influence gets exercised a lot in organizations, right? So the ability to control decision criteria. If you can say, well, this is how we're going to make the decision, people can do their analysis. They can come up with, you know, the right answer. But what nobody's paying attention to is you're the person who said we're going to make this decision, this resource allocation based on headcount rather than use. For instance, we talked about an IT example of this. Um, our capacity, one way that power is exercised and influence is the control of information, and the degree to which people control information, control the information that groups have to make a decision. Very often you're just controlling the decision, and then certainly your ability to impose time constraints and kind of force processes is another way to kind of force through decisions as well. One of the things that we said that is, especially in the United States, there is a high regard and a great love for having a vote. And what people oftentimes don't think about is who's exercising the power of specifying the alternatives. Because the specification of the alternatives can have a very big impact on what the vote is. And if some alternatives just don't ever get considered, of course they're not going to be adopted. And it also has the capacity to sway what is that does get adopted. Then also this, withholding unfavorable information. Very often when we see scandals erupt, sometimes it's around somebody didn't share unfavorable information that would have informed the decision. Again, that's, politics can be used for bad things to happen too. But politics are also a normal part of organizations and how things happen. We said one of the things that definitely, as you move into higher levels of management, the use of outside experts and consultants. Very often they're there to justify a decision. They of course have a whole process they go through. They put in a lot of effort, pay them a lot of money, but who hired them and what was the purpose of their being hired. Very often they're hired with a very specific purpose in mind. They're vetted in order to derive at that. So people who have the power to hire consultants, which is often very jealously guarded in an organization. They do not let, your firm does not let just anybody hire a consultant. And it's because people in control of the firm understand the powerful role these experts can have in influencing decision processes. And then we also said that power to control the agenda is also a way to influence what happens in meetings. Finally, we talked about, power can be present in organization, but it can be also very stable. So it doesn't mean the fact that we have power as a factor and people getting power and exercising influence doesn't mean we have a particularly political environment. It is in in the environments where we have a lot of instability, where people actually have something to gain. There's influence to be gained above and beyond the departmental influence or kind of individual position influence. And it's in the presence of these instabilities that we really see situations which are people trying to exercise power. So in the presence of succession crisis, where there's no clear who's going to be the successor CEO. That's a point of instability, and people start playing nasty with each other sometimes in those cases. One of the things we talked about, again, is this notion of strategic contingencies, is when strategic contingencies are shifting, there start to be instability. Different people's expertise is needed. They start getting pulled onto teams. And, sometimes in the presence of this instability is a succession crisis on top of it all. And then, it really gets tough. So from the standpoint of this kind of rational analysis, right, is the strategic contingencies is a source of adaptation. when they change and the power and influence starts to change, that can be very adaptive at the firm level. It's a good thing for the firm to kind of resort its power and politics, but but the thing here is not pretty for the people involved. So if you're involved in an organization that's going through a merger and there's a lot of politics involved with it, or you're involved in an organization where the strategic contingencies are shifting and new groups are, starting to have more influence and demand greater level of influence, those political environments can be tough to live in. So to say that it's adaptive to the organization, ultimately the political activity and then the presence of power politics is useful at the organizational level, that can definitely be true. I think it is true. Doesn't mean those are nice places to work. But certainly understanding them and starting to understand how do you exercise influence in interpersonal relationships? How do you build up your trust network? What is your coalition? Are you a trusted person? Are really critical effectiveness skills for leaders who find themselves in these environments of instability, where you're in an industry that has just a lot of volatility in the marketplace, probably going to be accompanied with instability in the organization. If you want a nice, quiet life, probably a bureaucracy is the life for you. You're going to hate it on a lot of other dimensions, but at least the basis of power are stable. And this actually does become a factor when you start thinking about, do you want to work in a firm? Are you going to be in a position to exercise power, to be able to gain influence, to be an effective contributor? Or are you going to be socked in the eye every single day that you go in? And those are factors. This political assessment is something that's useful to think about when you look at joining an organization. On the further readings, I mentioned the Lehman Brothers case. This is a book about that and about the internal politics that that firm went through that involved, kind of this massive reallocation of control from the investment bankers to the traders, a lot of inside fighting, and these things are not readily visible to outside observers. This is kind of an unusual case where it was highly visible, and so there are definitely lessons to be learned there and to be avoided. The top researcher and writer in the area of power and politics is Jeff Pfeffer, who is a professor at Stanford University. His book, Managing with Power, is used as the text in a very large number of power and politics courses in business schools all over the United States. And so it's a very good reference book to have, and we hope at some point to be offering a course in power and politics at the University of Utah in the next year or two. I'm hoping it's going to come online. Finally, we have a book by Rosabeth Moss Kanter, The Change Masters, and hers is a study of how middle managers in forming coalitions in a very garbage can model kind of way, and we talked about this book in conjunction with the garbage can model, how they come to have significant influence, certainly advances their career, but she actually argues that it's one of the real cores of business that empowers leadership is this capacity for middle managers working through coalitions to enact changes that improve the organization's financial performance, improve the job security for everybody because they're economically vital organization, and this kind of critical role played by any middle management. So it's very informative, and she's looking at very large organizations, but there's certainly lessons to be learned there. And Kanter is also considered one of the top people in the power and politics area.